Okay.
Okay. Let's call the work session of the council to order. It is June 4th, 2024. It is preceding D-Day, 5:31 p.m. And we will ask our clerk, Sharon Ellison, to call the roll. And we're going to talk about how we're going to kind of flip the processes here in the work session. So, Sharon.
Councilmember Bradley.
Here.
Councilmember Jackson.
Here.
Councilmember Pierce.
Here.
Councilmember Risser.
Here.
Mayor Hovland.
Here, present. So we're going to take on the administrative procedures, meeting procedures issue first. And Neil will do a little introduction there, and then we'll go from there and do the performance goals thing second. And, there's some staff people that need to depart early, so we're going to switch it up that way. Scott, go ahead.
Yes. Thank you, council members. This meeting has been on our calendar for some time to figure out a number of different performance issues with regards to our kind of how we do our meetings, how we plan for our meetings, how do we use our work sessions, et cetera. So one of the bigger questions that's been raised earlier this year was meeting standards, and particularly meeting minutes standards. And are the current standards that we use for minutes acceptable to the council? And so the person in charge of keeping those standards and processing our minutes is our city clerk, Sharon Ellison. Sharon's done some research and wants to talk to you a little bit about how our minutes are produced, and then we'd like to have some more discussion with the council about how you see them and what direction you want them to go, if any.
Sure, absolutely. So our minutes are typed up by a contractor. Time Saver has been typing our minutes since 2008. And in taking a look at some of our minutes back to probably about the 1990s, our minutes we probably average about 10 to 26 pages of minutes. And I would describe it as a combination of summary and transcript style. And the reason I describe it that way is that typically a transcript style set of minutes is probably about 40, 50 pages, nowhere near the 26 pages. So there were times in looking back at some of those minutes where we had 26 pages where some details were provided. And there were times when it was more summary style, is how the minutes were done. And then in 2008, closer to the end of the 2000, we went to strictly summary style minutes only. And I believe that the reason for doing that, in talking with Time Saver, who was the contractor when we went through that change, is it was changed to summary style because the minutes previously were done in such a way where it reflected individual voices. So it would say Councilmember Jackson said, Councilmember Risser said, and so on. And there were times when the minutes were changed drastically because a council member may not have been happy with how their voice sounded in the minutes. So the decision was made to go to summary style rather than, and then it would be a collective voice. It would be council member agreed to or council member shared rather than the individual voice. And that's how it's been done ever since. Looking back to where right now it is more reflective of staff's narrative in the minutes, and it only states council had discussion. I'm not sure why that decision was made to do the minutes in that way, but there definitely could be some changes made in that regard. Now, looking at the cost for the current process that we're using in that as a summary style minutes, for 2023, for example, the cost was nearly $8,000 to type the council meeting minutes, and that is only the city council meeting minutes. Time Saver also types several other meeting minutes, including HRA, Planning Commission, as well as the work session meeting minutes that they recently started, and the Planning Commission meeting minutes also. So as you're making changes, consider how that may impact the cost across the board for other meeting minutes. The Time Saver is also typing up. Also consider that,
Sharon, before you go on, is it more expensive to have more typed up?
I'm sorry,
So, yeah, if it's a summary or a transcription, is that more expensive?
a transcription is way more expensive than a summary style, because a transcription would be going about, for the length of meetings that we have, you could end up with 40 to 50 pages if we were to switch to a transcription style type of minutes.
Okay, thank you.
I remember that when we made those decisions back in the way, that we were spending a significant amount of money, significantly greater than $8,000 on transcript style, for that combination of transcript and summary style.
Not necessarily so from what I've seen, because I have the cost breakdown from 2009. I don't have from 2008, but 2009,
So before 2008, you don't have anything?
I don't have the cost
Okay.
for that, but before 2008, the minutes were typed up internally. So those were done, it was done by staff. And I would imagine that some staff capacity were taken into consideration. Maybe staff just did not have the capacity to continue to type a summary / transcription type style of minutes, which is why it was probably given to a contractor to type. And currently, from what we're seeing right now, there isn't capacity either. If we were to switch to a transcription style form of minutes, and we were to do it for city council, HRA, planning commission, and the work session, that would be extremely time consuming for us to do that internally. Several of our boards and commission minutes are typed up by Time Saver also, and those staff liaisons simply do not have the capacity to do those internally. So something to keep in mind. Now, in terms of what changes could be made, there was an example included in the packet showing how Minnetonka does their minutes. That is definitely something to consider. One thing that you could think about doing is, rather than having the bulk of the minutes right now showing or including staff content or staff discussion, that could be flipped to where there are a couple sentences of what staff is presenting on, and it could be flipped to where council, it's more of a council discussion. It could be a 1 to 2 paragraph of council's discussion on a specific topic. You could also take a look at if, for example, it was a development project that was being presented to you. If you wanted to capture in the minutes approving the development project, so you're making a motion to approve, but you also wanted the minutes to reflect some additional conditions that you're placing on that developer, that could be included in a 1 to 2 paragraph. If you wanted to, if a council member voted nay on an item, and you wanted to capture why that council member voted nay, that also could be included. So you do have some flexibility to still stay within a summary style if that's your desire, to still stay within a summary style type of meeting minutes. Currently, our meeting minutes are running probably anywhere between 5 to 10 pages. Within the current contract that we have, we can go up to 14 pages without significantly increasing our cost. So something else to consider.
So one of the questions I had when I was looking through this was, sometimes when we get a presentation, we'll ask staff for follow-up things. So, yes, this is great, but can we hear about that? I think that might be helpful for me anyways. So when you're talking about like with the development, the conditions we put on, if there could just be like, additional actions kind of added to that. That's the one thing that we're not really capturing now. And it's like something that kind of like, oh yeah, I've forgotten.
I feel that it's important to have both the voices of council members and HRA commissioners in the minutes. And so a summary style where our voices were heard, I think, is really important. And I went back and I looked at the minutes from our June meetings, the special meetings regarding the Londonderry Redevelopment Authority project. And going through those, there's a lot of summary of what the developer said, what staff said. Missing, it just says the board asked questions and provided feedback. And so with that second meeting in June on the 15th, where, and I learned a lot, and this really stuck with me both from Commissioners Hovland and Jackson about the cost of the sewer. And that was just this profound realization. And to go back to the minutes and to see that that is not in there at all is concerning to me, especially when you read what is expected by the Office of the State Auditor. And it does note that, you shouldn't have a lot of clutter. However, a governing body's reasons for reaching a particular decision may be important for defending a challenge to the action taken. In that circumstance, the minutes should include all findings of fact, conclusions, and reasons for conclusions so that the entity may defend its actions. And, I think that's important. The other thing though, and I haven't had time, but I do want to go back to the minutes that were generated at the council level for the first time that development project came forward as a for-profit development project and see if there's any information about the sewer hookup and the cost. And I think in terms of making it easier for us as council members and HRA commissioners, having minutes that reflect our dialogue would be so valuable to me. And I find myself having to go back and watch the video, and it's hard to get to the point where I want it to be. And I know, Mayor Hovland, you've served for decades, and just to have minutes that would reflect what, your contributions in the dialogues at the council level were, I think would be something that, just in terms of seeing the history of all of that, is a valuable thing. But, it does appear there's requirements that the state has, and the state also says audio or visual recordings of meetings are not meeting minutes and are not a substitute for meeting minutes. And I think we need to capture what the elected officials say, and that's not really happening. I did also note, because I went back and I looked at the April 8th, 2021 meeting, minutes of the HRA when the pedestrian bridge was first introduced to the HRA. And those minutes actually do contain commissioner comments affirming that the connection is to businesses on the east side. And they're even respectfully submitted by Scott Neal, executive director. And having somebody sign off, we don't have anybody signing off on the minutes. And so
the
anyway,
minutes,
I'll stop now, but yeah.
Yeah, so to respond to a couple things that you've said, starting with signing off on the minutes, minutes are not required to be signed. They're recommended. So the documents that you're looking at are recommendations, some of those things that you're stating.
Right.
We do, however, sign the minutes in that the mayor and I, after you, the council members, approve the minutes, the mayor and I do sign the minutes, but it is a recommendation. It's not a state requirement. And in terms of what is required to be in the minutes, it is action taken. Mm-hmm. It's not a dialogue. It's not a discussion. The law requires action taken. However, as a body, it's up to you to decide what you'd like to see in your meeting minutes. And that has changed over the course of several years, right? So that's totally up to you as a body, what you'd like to see.
Yeah, my question would be, what problem are we trying to solve?
Yeah.
And if I understand what that is, then I think I can advocate for a decision one way or the other. And so I'm just being completely honest, I don't use the minutes. And this may not be great for staff, because if something comes up, I am gonna ask staff the questions that I have. I am rarely gonna go look for the minutes. I'll actually watch the video before I'll read the minutes, because oftentimes I am trying to get a feel for what was said, how it was said, what was the passion around this particular topic. So I'll actually go back to the video versus read it through the minutes. And it's tough in a written document to have the voice. And so to me, when I hear voice, I think about marketing. And so how do you express the emotion, the nuances, and what's being said in written word? I just think that's hard to do. And then the other thing I would say, and I think we have done this, I've done it a few times, where we've had a conversation and I wanted it to be in the minutes in a certain way. And I've said, I would like for this to be reflected in the minutes in this way, and here's why. And you've taken that, and I don't know how it gets in there, who does it, but it ends up in there. And so I do think some of this too is the onus can be on us as council to give in the flow directions for things that we want, as it would be the same as if we took a vote and we wanted it to be roll call for a particular reason. We can request that in the meeting and then we would execute on that. So all of that to say, my question is, we need to make sure we understand what problem we're trying to solve. Well, and then the other thing I do, to the point that Member Risser made, I do want to be confident that we're meeting requirements in state statute. So, and that's such a, and again, I'm just being very transparent. I am not going to go read the statute to find out what it should be for minutes. I'm going to ask staff, what is it? Are we meeting it? Is there any place that's gray? And I am trusting that the hand will be raised if it's, yeah, we're gray in this area or this area, we need to shore this up. Then I want to dig into it. So that's it.
Yeah, so in my kind of assessment, I do think I kind of echo your thoughts of, I'm confident that we're meeting the minimum requirements of what we need to do. I have no concerns about that. I think that then leads to, what do we want to get out of it? Because I surely don't want it to go back to being a full transcription. I don't think that that's worth the investment when we do have audio and video, and not suggesting that that is a replacement for minutes, right? It says that in here, it's not a substitute. But if what the goal is to provide that end-to-end insight into what was said at the meeting, I do think that the video and audio do a good job at that. And so where I'm kind of leaning is there more that we could bring in, or could we even just shift the needle a little bit on, less on the developer or the staff presentation to us, less of a summary on that, and more of a summary on the discussion, and maybe some of those key outliers. You know, if someone has if the vote is 4-1, like, what is that one position? I think that could be valuable for that skim ability of it, because even myself, when I'll go and watch the planning commission video, and then if it's been a couple of weeks before we're reviewing it, I might want to just go and see the minutes to remind myself, like, what was the vote and what were some of those outliers. And so that is one way that I consume the minutes that I would find value. And then also thinking of residents, if they're not at the meeting, they don't have the time to devote to consuming the entirety of the video, can they at least get an understanding of what transpired? And yes, they can today, but they're gonna get a lot more of what was presented to us rather than how we responded. And so that's where I see there could be some value in that.
I agree entirely with what you said, and I think it could also be if the minutes did focus more on the dialogue, that would meet the paragraph that's on page 2 of the auditor's thing about, you know, including information about how decisions are made. But sometimes residents ask me what happened at the meeting, or they want to know why something was decided. And if we had minutes that reflected those key decision points, it would be so easy to just say, here are the minutes, and you could cut and paste the part that had information about the dialogue. I think that would be hugely helpful.
It does move the needle on how diligent we need to be in reviewing minutes. Like, I go through it and I'm like, okay, yep, that makes sense. But now when we're also attributing, you know, remember Risser said X, remember Agnew said Y, it's on us then to be diligent about that. So just, not saying that that's good or bad, just calling that out as I think my expectation of myself as a city council member is different in minutes review at that point.
And I would be comfortable if it didn't come down to individual names, but the key points that were raised. I mean, I have no issue with that.
So, to your point, Member Pierce, what are we doing this? To me, it's a legal document. And when we have, if you think of the pyramid of discretion, where we have almost no discretion, we should detail why we voted the way we did. If we have total discretion, I don't think that that's necessary, because we can say no just because we don't like something, and we don't have to prove. And the more detail we put into there, if we're in a lawsuit, the more trouble we're in. So the more minimal the minutes can be, the less monkey business can happen later. Whether it's reviewing, did we review what we said exactly, or is there a lawsuit coming where our lawyer's like, why is this in here? It's not necessary, and now you know, you've given them evidence that they wouldn't otherwise been able to introduce. So I think of it in that term. So it's really important to show that we, you know, if someone recuses themselves, right? They recuse themselves for this reason, and that was one of the, and I think we do that, and stuff like that. But I don't want the minutes to be used as a reason to reopen an issue that's closed as well. And that was kind of the feeling I got going through this. Like, once a decision is done, the city council has made its decision, and I don't want to have to go back and reopen it because, well, oh, they made this really good argument, now you need to reopen it. You know, the decision's made, and we move forward. So those are my thoughts.
To the point about the legal aspect, less is more for the city attorney.
Yeah.
In our minutes. So that's a good point that you just raised.
If we are ever engaged in some sort of lawsuit, we do of course turn meeting minutes over to our council, but they're not really interested in that as much as they are the raw video, right? Because that way they can see exactly what was said by whom to whom.
There have been circumstances in the past where on that pyramid of discretion that Carolyn's talking about, we've had less discretion, but we voted in a particular way either to grant or deny an application. And in some of those circumstances, we've had advice from the city attorney at the time or our land use professionals that the actual findings that we make should be crafted by staff to be incorporated in the next minutes, so that we've got ourselves covered. Our discretion is more subject to challenge, I suppose. But what I remember is that pre-08, the minutes were so detailed. It was not only costly, but it was a conversation every meeting, it seemed like, about how you interpreted a word, how I interpreted that same word, you know. Yeah. And so then we went to more of this reporting sort of style, where it was more minimalist, but the case point met the statutory requirements. So, I mean, we got guidance on that and what we could do. Certainly, if we wanted to move back a little bit, as you say, and add a little bit more content, akin to what Minnetonka does, you know, some brief statement of what.
I like what Minnetonka had, and if we're saying we're trying to tweak this to help us be more effective as a council, I'm okay with that. Just to be more transparent, not a single resident has ever asked me in now my 4th year about meeting minutes. There's never been anything that's come up specifically related to that. People have asked at the meeting, what was the discussion? And then I have to be able to provide an answer to that, which I can. But in terms of what we're doing and what we've been doing and what we're doing now, no resident has ever asked me a question about it. That could just be me, but.
So on this first page of the statement of position, meeting minutes from the state auditor, it seems to me like it's only those items that are on the first page that are statutory in nature, and note at the bottom the auditor says this statement of position is not legal advice. It is subject to revision. So, you know, beyond what the information they provide beyond what the statutory requirements are is more opinion based than legal based.
The other question I have about this is the historic record. So I remember when I first, golly, I don't even remember what it was. It was something like 2008. I had to research something that had happened, I think in the formation of the HRA or something like that. And so I was able to pull up the minutes and go through and read them. And so if I wanted to research trends about how many environmental changes had the city council made, I'd be able to find that. I don't think I would necessarily use the minutes to flesh it out as to who the people, just trying to put my historic hat on and think about that. But I think that what we've got is sufficient to show trends and issues of the day.
Yeah, I think we have to rely on staff for that data if you needed to do that.
So are we comfortable doing something more akin, you know, taking that less minimalist approach and notching it up a little bit to do something more akin to what they're doing in Minnetonka?
Reduce the content on staff's narrative, increase council's narrative, discussion points, decision-making, how you arrived at your decisions. If somebody took an opposing view, what the reasons were for that view.
Could we do that as soon as tonight, or do we need to give people a little more time to adapt?
We probably could. I will check with Carla.
Okay.
And see. You could potentially see it in this next round.
And I would say still minimalist, right?
Yes.
Not
Still
still
summary
summary
style.
Yeah, but very similar, I think, to the Minnetonka. Just one paragraph or one sentence.
So Sharon, do you feel like you got from us what you
I
needed?
do. Yeah. Thank you very much.
Everybody comfortable with
No, and that's very helpful. It will help me prepare and help me save time.
Then there were a couple other items on that.
Yeah, and I'll try to go through these quick. Meeting schedule, reschedules. There are times when you have some items that are on your calendar or on your agenda that are important, that are bigger than others, more important than others, and you've had some concern about if everybody isn't here around the table. Should we make a decision this big if not all 5 of you are present? Our current protocol is if there's a quorum of you, you need to meet, right? If it's scheduled for a date and time and there's a quorum available, we should have a public meeting as you have planned. If we're moving away from that, that's something we need some time to understand how that changes our calendar, or how that changes how we act, who we notify, how do we cancel a meeting, all of that kind of thing. So we're we're not recommending, I'm not recommending any change in that protocol, but if this is, but I have sensed at times that you wished it weren't that way. So if there is something like that that you'd like to change, this is a good time to discuss and change it.
And what are you seeing as the definition of a previously approved meeting?
A previously approved meeting would be the schedule of meetings that you will approve in December for the upcoming year.
So I don't know how you go about defining what the circumstances would be when you have a quorum and you're not gonna meet.
Yeah.
What are those factors, you know? Well, we think it's a really big land development. You know?
Right.
It seems like it's so vague that you gotta stick with the basic rules.
When did you, yeah, this is confusing to me because I never thought about this at all.
We haven't done it. We've delayed the start of meetings sometimes to make sure we have everybody here. But we haven't canceled this, but we have talked about it, and I've sensed there's some concern about it when there's a big issue and you're not all together. If I'm misreading that or not reading that right, then there's not necessary. I'm not advocating that you change anything here. I'm just providing that context in case you want to.
There have been times where I have like reached out and sought like confirmation of what is on the agenda for a specific meeting if I'm considering potentially being out of town and missing it. But I've always viewed that like that's on me to like understand what are the topics, if they are big topics, to adjust my schedule accordingly. And there have been some where I've been like, do we have to do it this day, or could this topic potentially have some flexibility depending on like our legal obligations, right? We have the 60 days for some things. But I don't know that like
That's a good example.
wouldn't lead me to think we should change our policy.
I agree with that. I think the onus has to be on us, as individual council members. We understand what's on the agenda. We know if it's 4/5 or supermajority or not. If we want to be there and can't, then I think we have to own either asking that the agenda be shifted or deal with it in a different way.
And, you know, if something were to happen and for some reason, someone was stuck on a plane in, you know, Antarctica, we always approve the agenda. So we can do it right then and there, saying, you know, this is Kate's favorite topic. She's the one who brought it forward. It was her initiative, and she's stuck in Antarctica. Let's change the agenda. So we have that flexibility right now, and so I don't think we need to change anything permanently.
And you all have been pretty good about letting us know when you're going to be on. That's very helpful. As soon as you know that we've got, Jennifer takes care of that. She knows she's got a master calendar to take care of.
You wait now, something will happen that. You know, I was thinking of like, what year was that, 16 or 18, when we had that Larney Thomas incident down on Church Street, you know, and say that one of us, and we knew that there was a whole group of people coming in to talk to the council. It was going to be a really important meeting, or it's a big land use thing, and we've had them line up on both sides of the chambers, yays and nays. And somebody has a relative that has a health issue, a parent, and you have to jet off somewhere. You know, it's a kind of, there will be circumstances where we think, gee, I wish everybody was here so we could have everybody's opinion.
Yeah.
I guess we would be operating like everybody else if we just said, if we got a quorum, we got to go.
Yeah. Okay.
We got to go forward with the meeting.
And then I'll just say, I expect you to tell me too, like, no, this isn't movable, or where we do have that flexibility.
Yeah.
But then again, it's my decision, it's each individual decisions then.
Okay. And to that point, you have done, for me at least, James, we need you to be there for this. And then it's like, all right, well, I'll make it happen. Or
You
what?
can go to Madagascar some other time, right? The last thing on this piece is the proclamations piece. And there is no consistency in how we have handled proclamations for a long time. We have two types of proclamations. One is the mayoral proclamation, and the mayor has the authority to make that proclamation any day, anytime, for any purpose. Doesn't have to get the council or anybody else's sign off on that. City proclamations, however, do come with a council endorsement to them. The question we have as staff is that this is, in many ways, is a political act, right? There's a proclamation that has at some point some sort of point of view, which is really more political than it is administrative almost every time. And who makes the call as to how those items get on the agenda is difficult. Sometimes they're easy. National Public Works Week is easy. National EMS Week is easy. But there are lots of them that aren't easy. And the question, and in an election year, I anticipate we'll have lots of them. That's the question, is how do you wish us to handle that, or what role do you want to play in handling that? Jennifer and I have talked earlier today about adopting a system similar to how we do for significant days of significance in the way that we handle through our social media. So that's one way we could do this, where you tell us, you know, kind of at the outset of the year, here's the proclamations that we plan to do.
Some of these are tricky, because I'll get requests and then I send them to you guys to look at before we even talk to the council, but you'll get some really off-the-wall stuff that they want you to do a proclamation on the city council proclamation. It could be National Reptile Day. Everybody has their pet reptile.
Falun Gong Memorial Day. There's a lot of odd stuff.
So I don't know.
Well, the thought that comes to my mind is the way our system of government is we have 5 of us and we have 5 votes. And so, I mean, I think I would give the mayor the discretion to pick up things that he wants to say, but that leave it in his hands to pass it down if it's too hot to handle, kind of thing. But I mean, I think we have to have some sort of funneling, and we can't.
When you say pass it down, what do you mean?
Well, so let's say, Mayor Hovland wants to make it everybody golf at Bredesen Day. He may think, you know, it'd be nice to have the entire council behind me. It's a city thing. Let's make it national.
Especially if there's no golf at Bredesen.
Yeah. But
You really need to
There could be.
support the council.
It's disc golf, we're gonna stick the things in.
But when I serve on the, or I part of the city's climate coalition, in Rochester, there was a real split between the council and the mayor on declaring a climate emergency. So Mayor Norton signed a proclamation about the climate emergency because she didn't think it could get passed through council, but she felt very strongly about the issue. So that's kind of where I'm thinking that, you know, the preference would be for a city proclamation. But if there was something that you personally felt strongly about and the rest of us, you know, it would be contentious or, you know, not beneficial to.
The kinds of things I typically get where I'm asked to do a mayoral proclamation is somebody turns 100 and it's Edith Johnson Day over in Edina, you know, or it was Peter Brocious Day, the guy who retired as director of the Children's Theater. So we declared a Saturday Peter Brocious Day in Edina. That's a typical thing that I get for a mayoral proclamation.
And today, those things are only approved by you.
Yeah.
And then we just vote on them.
We don't vote on it at all.
We don't
When they're
see them.
read in council.
That's a city
I'm only
proclamation.
reading council proclamations.
Okay, okay.
Yeah, so the Peter Brocious Day was never presented to the council for.
Jennifer crafted it based on information she got from the Children's Theater. I got down there and there were 3 proclamations that were almost identical from the state, from Minneapolis and from us. And
So the city proclamations are approved how?
That's what we're talking about. So right now, they make their way onto your council agenda,
Yeah.
and you read them and take an action on them.
So the reason I'm trying to ask the question that way, most of those, I don't think I have ever had an issue with. But when, with Israel, with the war, I got emails, and maybe all did, saying, hey, Edina should do a proclamation. And in that case, I think I emailed you or forwarded something to you or what have you. And so I think there could be issues like that are contentious, but the various days of the month, I really think those are okay, and we're recognizing those in a good way. So my question would be for things like that, because the process we're using today doesn't really catch anything, I don't think. Is that fair?
Yeah, this was a great example. Let's say you were gonna condemn the violence in Gaza. And now, how would we go about talking to each other about that? Because we can't have a serial conversation. And you don't really want to raise it in the context of a council meeting as to whether we should or shouldn't have a resolution in that manner and put people on the spot if they're having some discomfort about it. Yeah. So I guess it's maybe up to you as a staff person to kind of pull people one-on-one to find out how do you feel about, well, you may be called and said how you felt about it.
Yeah, I mean, we talked about it. The person who asked me actually sent me a proclamation from, I think, Minneapolis. And I talked about it with the resident, and then I think I ended up saying, hey, I don't think we should do this for these reasons. And then it just died, I guess, from there. And so I think that's okay, but that seemed informal to me. And so that's why I'm asking for things like that, should it be more, even the process we just described, that could be it. It doesn't have to be fancy, but more formal.
So one thing that we did in Hopkins, we had the Ukraine stuff come up, and Ukraine, they have a sister city, and they actually made a decision that they were going to do something for Ukraine because there was a direct tie that they felt was strong enough because that sister city. But they basically had a policy that when it came to global stuff that wasn't a direct tie to something they've already previously taken a stand on, that they weren't going to consider them. So that may be something you could consider of how does it tie to the community directly?
I like that, and that makes me think we need guidelines, and so I kind of feel like we need guidelines, and then we could come back to this and have a more robust discussion, but.
The other thing that they did is when they adopted their annual calendar, and they also looked at the proclamations at that time and said, what did they want staff to bring forward? So that was an opportunity if there were things that, sometimes you miss them, right? Because they come up so last minute, or you don't realize it, and then it's too late to get it into the packet or whatever it was. So opportunity to maybe we could have that conversation when we look at the annual calendar.
That's what Jennifer was talking about. Whatever we set, calendar.
What Scott's talking about, yeah.
We can take a crack at that. We don't have anything now, so
But
anything we
there will be
bring to you will be.
circumstances where, I just am trying to recall, like when we set up that domestic registry, or it's a proclamation about tobacco back in the day, you know? Those things are
Meaningful.
meaningful, but controversial for some folks. So we just have to kind of feel our way on that and let you kind of pull people one off if we want to have a conversation about it. If we get a majority of people who want to talk about it, then we should talk about it.
And then maybe we could also put something in there in the draft that it sounds like we're gonna then review at a later time on some of those proclamations that we get emailed that are kind of like this, maybe a little silly, maybe not worth, not where we want to prioritize our time necessarily. I'll use the reptile example,
Limited
not saying that's one of them
relevance.
necessarily, but
I'm an attorney.
from the level of relevance to us as a city, some type of bar there too, I think would be helpful in communicating back to people about why we might not be bringing it to a city council meeting.
I agree. I like that need to have local relevance. I think that, yeah.
Okay, a little bit.
It does. We'll take a crack at using what we already do for the days of significance and try to build a little structure around it about how we want to vet these going forward.
Okay,
Excellent.
all right. Move on to the other topic.
Yeah, the last item is just a review or affirmation or something over my 2024 performance goals. These are goals that I first shared with the council back in December of 2023. And Councilmember Risser had some proposed additions to it. Councilmember Pierce did as well. I didn't have time to include Councilmember Pierce's, but Councilmember Risser's information has been included. So I'm happy to answer any questions or
Go ahead, Jim.
Just one quick comment on kind of state of the obvious for next year. We need to make sure this is on the calendar so that it's done in December. Meaning, if anybody's adding anything, we get all that stuff in there. Because it's June.
Yeah.
And not that many of the things that we've talked about, I know staff is working on, but still, we should be starting the year with a fresh slate.
Agreed.
So you don't think you should come and pack everything in 6 months?
But it would be good as well to, and I know in March, we did talk about the whole process. And I know when we did the performance review, you talked about things that you wanted added. And so that was back in January. And then I believe that came up again in March.
In March, yeah.
And so a couple of concerns. In December, it's good to see, it's great, Manager Neal had his goals articulated. I think it would be logical for the council to be able to think about those goals. And then when we have the review in January, we're probably going to be thinking about other things. And so making a deadline in January for getting that information, instead of trying to cram it all into December, which is such a busy time anyway.
Makes sense.
So I think that would be really good. So there's that, and I totally understand not wanting to add a bunch of stuff here in June. One concern I have is goals versus basic expectations. And, where do those come into play? And admittedly, I mean, last year was the first time I was involved in this process. I do think it would make sense to break things down so that it wasn't only the goals that sort of carried the response. And I think we talked about leadership style, and I believe, I want to credit you for that, because I think that was you were the first to introduce that. But duties, personal development, all of those things factor in, and it would be good to have sort of some percentage things tied to that. So I again am rambling and I should probably stop. But the things that I added, I don't know if adding those to performance goals was too onerous. I am concerned about the DOJ investigation and just really, it'd be great to get, I don't know if there's been any updates, but just, that, and honestly, I would like to have some kind of a postmortem on how we got to that position.
You're talking about the pedestrian bridge?
The pedestrian bridge,
DOJ.
Oh, we
Yeah.
got to what position of having an investigation?
right.
Yeah.
That's a complaint driven by a resident,
Well,
accepted by the DOJ.
there's more to it than that, though. Like, we approved a project that, I want to at least have an opportunity to find out. And this is another thing, that was financed with unallocated TIF money. And I think, we could say this is a different topic, but I think we need to talk about how those funds are handled and the lack of engagement with the residents on those, because they really don't come up for any kind of public hearing or any kind of public vetting process. And when I go back and I look at the video, it's interesting because it's one project that's initially pitched that seems like it would have been very viable because it connected to the lower level, and then it ends up becoming something vastly different. And so, I guess when I say I'd like to know how that happened, I really would like to know how that happened.
So
Go ahead.
No, I understand that, but I would separate that from this.
Yeah, totally. I'm getting off on a tangent, but
So-
that's one of the points that I brought up,
Yeah.
So jumping back to the performance review, tell me a little bit about the work plan process. So I know staff brings their work plan and it kind of filters up to then what you're going to do. So you've got your work plan all put together in December. What I'm hearing Member Risser say is that in January, then we would approve that, or we approve it now in December. And then the work plan, Scott's work plan, so this thing that we're looking at today for 2024, were your goals and work plan, professional and performance goals for 2024.
Yeah.
Right.
And that
Yep.
would come to us in December.
Yeah, I think what I hear Councilmember Risser saying is maybe I should propose it to you in December, and then you should ratify it or endorse it in January.
Right.
There's a little more time to think about it.
Yeah.
I'm okay with that.
And that gives, if we have a change in council, a newly elected council member a chance to weigh in.
Good
So,
point. Yeah.
let's say there's a lightning bolt and we have to rebuild City Hall. And it happens December 15th, right? Or it happens in the summer, whatever. Someone runs over.
Priorities could change.
Priorities can change with a change of council.
Yeah.
And so that gives us that opportunity to have, for the communities, a will to be reflected in how it works. So I like that. But I also want to be mindful of the work plan process, because I know that yours is sort of the peak of the pyramid, and that, if changing something up here is going to move the pyramid like this, that's going to be a lot of work.
Yeah.
So that we have the capacity to not upset the apple cart and have to spend the next month for nobody doing their job, just reviewing their work plans. So that's my concern, but also I kind of like the idea of having the voice of the newly elected members.
Yeah, I support the timing shift, giving more time. I wouldn't recommend that we make any changes to the 2024 goals at this point, given that it is half the year is over.
Yeah, agreed.
We should,
I don't think we ever adopted them.
We did, I don't think we did. We should, what, since we're talking about it, it probably would be good to look at the goals for 2024. And the first one is orient and integrate the new assistant city manager. The new assistant city manager will start her new job on January 22nd, 2024. And then Scott will lead the effort to orient and integrate her into our organization. So that's the first goal. The second goal is to orient and integrate the new city management fellow. A new city management fellow will join our team June 2024. I will orient and integrate into our organization as quickly as possible. The third goal, increase my participation in department staff meetings. Department leaders have asked for more of my time to occasionally visit and participate in their departmental staff meetings. And then the fourth goal is to present a conference program on board and commission management at the 2024, you say ICMA, I don't know. It has been 20 years since Scott last presented. So those are the goals for 2024.
Those are part of the goals for 2024.
Those are the professional goals.
Yep.
Okay.
So that actually was the question I had. And I think it is fair if we step back, because we're actually changing this document and the process actually. We've made recommendations on the review process being different as well. And so when I look at this document, I still think I get confused on performance goals, professional goals, and then I think I added leadership goals, or at least talked around establishing leadership goals. And so that might be, so that's a third category where I talked about things like making sure we're addressing how we address community issues when it's a contentious issue. Talked about budget, how do we frame and articulate value for budget. So there were things like that in there, and Scott has those.
I do.
But I'm just giving you a reminder of what was in there. And so that is new in this document. And so the question I have would be things like, there's aspects of this that I think are kind of day-to-day activities. Integrating the assistant city manager, integrating the city manager fellow. I don't know that I think of those as goals per se, as specifically as they're written there. But Scott, you may have on your list, these are the things I gotta get done. And we would all agree on that, right? But I don't know, I ask you to kind of think about how you take those three categories and kind of orient the actions that we're looking at being taken in there. Because I think it needs a little bit more massaging to it.
What I have done previously is talked about I think of these as being two tiers, right? There's an upper tier and a lower tier. There's an upper tier that is really items that come directly from council and city-oriented priorities like Fire Station 3, the bonding bill, 5146 Eden Avenue, the Art Center. Those are big picture, across many departments. Council has given them some level of endorsement. The second tier goals or professional goals are things that are important to me, but maybe less important to you, right? They're things that need to get done, but they're not, but there's something I'm gonna do. I'm probably gonna do it anyway, whether it's written on this piece of paper or not, but it's something I can just share with you that I'm also going to be doing.
So
And then
I want to talk about your thing also, but I want to just go to these personal goals, professional goals. So Scott, when you are talking with your leadership team and they're putting their goals together, you're encouraging them to set professional goals as well, I would imagine. So I see this as a personal growth, job satisfaction element more than, moving the city ball forward, but to make sure that if I were, you manage Ari, you want to make sure that Ari is happy in her work and that she's growing as a person and doesn't get burned out. So you're going to say, Ari, I want you to set some professional goals so that at the end of the year you can say, being an assistant city manager at the city of Edina is a darn good job. And that's how I read these, so that Scott Neal at the end of the year can say, you know what? I grew as a person. This was a good year for me personally, and I want to stay here. So that's how I view these. Then what I'm hearing from you, Member Pierce, is sort of process goals. And this morning at Rotary, we talked with Annette Waldmeyer. got her name wrong.
Wildenauer?
Wildenauer, thank you, with the Innovation Lab, and she had some of her entrepreneurs there, and they're really good at making videos or putting together financial practices, but they don't have a chance to step back and look at how is my business as a business running, and this process that she has is for entrepreneurs to do that, and that's what I'm hearing you say, so a chance to step back and say, okay, as a business, as a city, an entity, can we look at the overall picture of how we do our work? And are those processes needing to be, things, and then you can, compare with other cities and however you're gonna do that. But that's a category that's not in here. And we as a council, this is our only venue, really, for setting those types of goals. But also sharpen your saws, but sharpen, make sure that our entity is being run in a good manner. So we've got specific goals, we've got personal goals, but we also have sharpen the saw goals. Whatever title you want to put on
Yeah,
that.
no, yes.
So that's how I'm hearing this.
That's what that Thursday.
So hand in hand with that is, Julie mentioned, and that is measuring performance. How are we going to do that at the end of the year? So we talked a little bit about that. We use this Craig Waldron to gather information from staff and from us. There are several people like him that do that work out there. We should probably start thinking about this, and maybe we should get that analysis that, I remember that for a couple of years we did the League of Minnesota Cities format, where they have different categories of performance, and then you measure them out and you score them. And so I think we should get that and take a look at it, because it might be that people like that idea, they don't like that idea, they want to continue with what we've been doing. Maybe regardless, you still need somebody to interview staff, although I suppose they can answer that questionnaire as well. But I'd better make that decision earlier rather than later, so that you know what the evaluation tool is that we'd be using.
Yeah.
And that would make a difference to you, I think. That'd be fair to you.
I did reach out to the League of Minnesota Cities to find out about, if they had a list of people who work as consultants for reviewing city managers, and also the processes used. And it was really interesting, because usually I hear back right away, and there were like 3 days that passed. And then they got back to me and said, we don't really have anything like that. But you've inspired us to pull together that material for you. I also did reach out to a political wonk who both you and I know, who recommended turning to the University of Minnesota Mankato. They have an Urban and Regional Studies Institute. And apparently, I had no idea, but a lot of people who are city managers come out of Mankato.
Some even in this room.
Yeah, okay, there you go. So it could be, and I have a name. Okay, and I have a name, and we're gonna talk on Monday, but just for the whole process, and I agree, and I would say, well, there were parts of the Craig Waldron process that I did not appreciate. The idea of having a consultant work with us and develop questions and approaches and interact with employees as well as us, I think is a good one. And so, I don't know how other people feel, but I think we kind of do need a consultant to be that intermediary, to make it all go smoothly. I also, in the review, I agree with Manager Neal that anonymity is not necessarily something that needs to happen between the council, and I think having that teed up as an expectation was really a hindrance, because I felt my concerns kind of got muted, and that's a problem. And then when you go in and you expect it to be anonymous and then that falls apart, that's also troubling. So I don't know how people feel about that, but I think, if the process would allow us to use our voices and Manager Neal could hear what our concerns are. The other thing is in the spirit of what an annual review is about. I mean, it's about creating an environment where you can let people know what you really think they're excelling at, and then if there's something you think needs to be improved, and if the person has no idea who said it, then how does that work? So,
I mean, we could prepare a pretty basic kind of RFP, put it out to some people that do this kind of work. There could be a council subcommittee that reviews those, maybe makes a recommendation back to the council.
and I think it needs to be council-led, because this is kind of our big responsibility.
It's one of our big ones.
Yeah.
It is a big one.
It is a big one, yeah.
He's the only person we hire or fire.
Exactly, so I think that's important.
I agree.
Yeah, I'm open to getting a different process this year for sure. What do we then want to say though are our next steps as far as like actual goals go? Do we want to change those at all or just?
No, I don't think so.
Okay.
But then what does that mean?
That means,
Is that?
well, we've got two issues on the table. One, are Scott's goals as articulated in the thing, and I think it's June, and I don't want to mess up his work plan. But then the second one is the review process.
Well, that's not the question I'm asking.
Okay.
So the goals that Scott sent us in December, then remember Risser added some things, I added some things, talked about them in December. Are we saying those things are included or not?
I don't think they're included at the moment.
And so that's the question.
Nothing was approved.
Right.
That's the problem, is that we now have to
Right.
decide what would be your.
Right, and just to be honest, I've moved ahead because I just needed to move ahead, and I wanted to have something for the end of '24 that you could look at, even if it wasn't something that we were all thrilled about.
But Member Pierce, when did you get back with your recommendations? Because I remember you talking about them back in January. And I feel like you, of all of us, stepped forward with your recommendations in a timely manner.
In the review.
Right, and I think that is important, and all of us actually raised points during the review. And so to have a process that does not reflect any of that, I find troubling.
Yeah, I mean, if that's what we're gonna do, then we have to figure out how we're gonna message that, because then I know I'm just gonna keep calling them leadership. In March, when we did the review of the contract, I gave a summary and I repeated those things in March. And so we're not gonna add them for 2024. Then yeah, but we gotta message that somehow.
So
If
I
that's
would,
what you guys meant by we don't add
Well,
to
and
2024.
that is what I meant,
Okay.
because where my concern came in was more about like, how much are we moving the needle? But the way that I heard what you just said is not necessarily evolving the performance goals that reference Fire Station 3, state bonding bill,
Right.
things that are more work plan specific and would have those cascading effects. And instead look at more of those leadership qualities of building trust or some of those other things that we provided as priorities. I will say that I was potentially being a little influenced by some that Councilmember Risser had included, because I don't think, and I'll just use this as an example, number 9, the Roslyn Park pedestrian bridge. While it is exciting to consider design options for the bridge, cost must be controlled or needs to be controlled. Like that, I think, is more of a council policy direction and not something that should be in an annual goal for the city manager. But I do like how he shows up, how like the leadership style, I do see value in including those. The way that I'm reading this packet though is this is just what Councilmember Risser provided. And so maybe it's something that we could add to, I mean, I think we'd have to get on it, but add to the next agenda of adding yours. Maybe you take the input, do a leadership section, show us the diff from what your initial goals were, and then we review and discuss that as a council.
I can do that.
That I agree, and number 9, you know, I can totally see that point. One thing that this whole discussion has, and a question I want to ask is, when it comes to the council, you know, taking on this task, you know, we do have we have to, you know, not violate open meeting laws and all of that, but could Member Pierce send his leadership goals to all of us? Would that be a violation? Or, I mean, can we, in terms of this topic?
You could send them to me and I could send them out to you.
Memo,
That's not.
who wrote these? Did Julie write these, or, because we've got 4 leadership goals here.
Yeah,
I don't know if that's,
those came from Councilmember Risser.
Yeah, those are not.
Everything that's in bold is from,
okay,
Yeah.
okay,
I think.
okay. It was,
But I can do that. I can put those together and send them out to all 5 of you.
yeah.
And I guess my ask would be specifically that you take input from Member Risser, Member Pierce, and then in the next couple of days, if we individually send you additional components, and then you review that of what you think your goals should be. Because that's how I've always worked on goals myself, so that you're able to provide that lens of, you know, if there is something that would be impacting performance goals, which I probably wouldn't recommend, you know, you could use that analysis, or if it's difference in professional, or if it's just the addition of leadership, at least having your perspective too on what's still achievable, knowing that we might be adding these in mid-year. But I think even redesigning the framework to include that moving forward is gonna be a benefit.
Great.
And as far as the review goes, I guess I don't have enough information to know, what the different ways of looking at it are. So if there was just, you know, if there is a memo from the, there isn't really, yeah.
So they're gonna get something soon.
So I just,
They're working on it, yeah.
Just,
I just participated in the executive director's performance review, right, as a board member there.
Yeah.
It was not terribly different than what we've done here, right? There was a survey that had some kind of continuums, a way you could answer some questions. So there was some data like that was created. There were individual interviews with board members that the consultant aggregated and then gave a report based on that.
And that's what we did with Scott Waldron.
We did that with Craig Waldron and Nick Rule and Harry Brule. I mean, it was the systems were very similar. There was a little difference to each one of them, but they're similar.
but it's not qualitatively different. It's not like, here's this memo, check, 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 versus soft and fuzzy kind of thing. They're all relatively the same structure.
Yeah.
Okay.
The scope can change because you can have more of what is a 360 where you're interviewing more employees from.
Right, and,
Yeah.
and it's qualitatively different, but not structurally different.
I would like to at least consider, I don't know what the right path is, a new consultant, just given that Craig Waldron has been in that role for a while, and explore others, but I don't know what process to take.
So, I agree. I'm still a little bit confused on what we're gonna be doing here. James, with respect to the leadership goals, are those things that Scott can engage in, or are they things that we would measure based on what we observe in terms of his leadership qualities? I wish I had your email in front of me here, but I don't.
Yeah. So I would say, yeah, we can measure those. Yeah, I don't know what else I was gonna say.
Yeah, I was thinking about, I think, trying to harken mentally back to the forum that had the leadership section, and it would be like, we would be answering the question, how effective is Scott at engaging with his staff and his directors, and then you'd answer the question, then it'd be like a score.
Right, yeah.
And so that seems to me to be something more in the category that we would be evaluating his leadership skills.
Yeah.
And then with respect to what Julie has put in here, Kate, where were you going with all of that? I couldn't quite follow what you were thinking about there, because we haven't had any kind of a council discussion on whether or not we think these are appropriate to include or not.
Yeah, and that's where I was recommending that over the next 2 weeks, we can all, if there are any different leadership goals or including Member Pierce's as well, email them to Manager Neal, allow him to kind of hone in on what he's envisioning and maybe include like a list of all the others that were provided, but a recommendation on here's what I would, as Scott Neal, like to see as my goals for leadership goals, so that then we can have a collective discussion on them. Well, one, we're running out of time, but I think that these are different than what I would expect for leadership goals.
But that's what I wrote, it's not what, and I think, I want to see what Member Pierce wrote, because and I know you articulated it multiple times, and I should be able to, you know, it's frustrating, because I know you've said it so many
I'm not sure I
times.
want to spend a lot of time on what Member Risser has submitted. I'll give you an example. Number 9, the Roslyn pedestrian bridge. Well, it's exciting to consider design options for the bridge. Costs need to be controlled. What's the performance goal there? Mind the till?
Well, no, okay, thinking about the work session that we had, and we spent all this, you know, visioning and all of that. I mean, and Kate actually brought that up and said she thought she didn't think that should be included. So I'm fine letting that one go, okay? But just thinking about big picture items and also keeping the budget so that it doesn't spin out of control. So yeah, in a sense, there is a little bit of mind the till. But I'm fine letting that one go. I have no problem with that.
If you go down a bit though, Mayor, there's this establishing 2024 leadership goals section. I think that's the part that I really want us to refine a little bit more, the leadership goals. And that's where we had build trust, or James's articulation of it. So that's what I want us to focus on in each of us providing insight back to Scott, and then he'll come to the next meeting with, here are my 3 or 4 leadership goals that have kind of passed his review as well, so that we're not just looking off of these.
That are in line with what can happen in 2024.
And then I do think in general, some of these things, Scott will kind of, you need to capitalize some of them, because I think they are like business as usual. Like cost management is a business as usual thing. Ensure that the city is kept risk neutral is a business as usual thing, right? And so those kinds of things could be worded as such, but may not end up being a goal that's listed. And I am happy to help kind of do a first view if you would like that assistance.
I would.
Yeah, if we concentrate on the leadership goals portion, it's easier to deal with, I think, than some of the elements of the performance goals. Only one council member has weighed in on. Okay, all right. Is that okay with you, Scott?
Yes, yeah, it is. I think I have an understanding of what you're asking.
Okay, all right. We stand adjourned. The work session stands adjourned.